"Mom, I ordered you an Uber, there's no room in the new car," my son said with his in-laws inside. As they left, I made a decision that changed everything. I canceled the loan for his car. Helen McCarthy had spent most of her adult life living in the same modest two-bedroom house on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. It was the kind of neighborhood where porches still mattered, and people left baked goods at each other's doors in the fall. The paint on her picket fence was starting to peel, but the garden was always tended, and the porch light always on, just in case Michael came by. He hadn't, not as much lately. She had been a nurse for over 30 years, a career that aged her hands but strengthened her voice. Michael, her only son, had grown up watching her juggle double shifts, memorize medical charts like scripture, and cook dinner half asleep. His father had walked out when Michael was 3. Since then, Helen had carried everything. She never complained, not to Michael, not even to herself. Complaining seemed like a luxury for people with less on the line. From the beginning, it was always Michael. Every birthday party she couldn't afford but threw anyway. Every scraped knee, science fair, college form. She had promised herself, quietly, without drama, that he would never feel like he lacked anything because of who had left. And for the most part, he didn't. He had her. That was enough. Years passed, and Michael made his way through college with a mixture of scholarships, part-time jobs, and Helen's unwavering support. She took out a small loan to help cover his final semester. He never asked for it, but she never told him he needed to. That's what mothers did. They just figured things out. After graduation, Michael found a job in sales and met Lindsay not long after. Helen remembered the first time she met her, polite, composed, with a smile that felt practiced. Lindsay came from a family of quiet money, nothing flashy but solid enough that Helen noticed how Michael's posture shifted in their presence. He held his shoulders differently, as though trying to match an invisible standard. The wedding was small but beautiful. Helen had offered to help pay, but Lindsay's parents covered most of it. Helen bought her dress from a clearance rack and got her hair done at a neighbor's house. She didn't mind. She cried during the vows, not just because Michael looked happy, but because she realized she was now watching him step into a life that had no space for the version of him she had raised. Still, she hoped. She hoped Lindsay would see Michael the way she did. She hoped he'd remember the woman who had stayed up through every fever and cheered the loudest at every piano recital. And when Michael mentioned he was thinking about buying a new car to replace his unreliable old sedan, Helen offered help before he could finish the sentence. "It's a big step," she told him one evening as they sat in her kitchen, the air smelling of lasagna and lemon-scented cleaner. "If you need someone to co-sign, I can do that. It'll help with the loan terms." Michael had hesitated, but not for long. "You sure, Mom?" "Of course," she'd said. "You deserve something that won't break down every other week." And just like that, Helen became the primary guarantor for the loan on a brand new SUV, sleek, black, with tan leather seats and the kind of modern dashboard that confused her every time she sat inside it. She didn't tell anyone that she dipped into her retirement savings to back it. That wasn't the point. The point was Michael. Always Michael. It wasn't just about the car. It was what the car represented. Stability. Maturity. The next chapter. She imagined him driving it to work, to family trips, maybe someday to pick up her future grandchildren. A vehicle for a full life. And for a while, things seemed fine. Michael thanked her, promised to make every payment on time, and even took her for a short drive after signing the paperwork. "Smells like a new beginning," he joked, his hand confidently on the wheel. But Helen noticed something else too, subtle changes. He called less often. Stopped dropping by unannounced. Conversations felt shorter, clipped. Lindsay answered the phone more than Michael did. Still, Helen didn't complain. She chalked it up to busy schedules, early marriage adjustments. Normal things. Then came the Sunday that would fracture everything. Michael had called her earlier in the week. "Hey, we're finally getting the car this weekend," he'd said. "You should come by. Thought you might want to see it." Her heart had lifted. "I'll bring brownies," she replied. "Just like old times." She spent that morning carefully wrapping the brownies in foil, cutting them into perfect squares. She wore a soft blue cardigan Michael had once complimented and even added a touch of lipstick, an old habit from her nursing days when presentation mattered. She wanted to look proud. She was proud. When she pulled up to the house, the SUV was parked in the driveway, shining under the late afternoon sun. Lindsay's parents were already there. Helen recognized them from the wedding. Well-dressed, coordinated, as though they lived life in matching sets. Michael stood by the driver's side, talking with Lindsay's father. Helen stepped out of her car, brownies in hand, a smile tugging at her lips. She was halfway up the walk when Michael noticed her. "Hey, Mom," he called out, his voice strained, polite. Thanks for coming." "Of course," she said, offering the brownies. "Thought I'd bring a little something." But Michael interrupted, his eyes darting to the crowded vehicle. "Actually, I ordered you an Uber. There's no room in the car." Helen froze. For a moment, she thought she misheard. The words sat in the air, awkward and sharp. He gestured toward the curb where a white sedan idled. The car's kind of tight with Lindsay's parents and all, so, figured it'd be easier. She looked past him. No one in the SUV had even turned to wave. She smiled. Not a real one, just the kind mothers learn to wear when something inside begins to crack. "That's thoughtful," she said softly. She handed him the brownies. He barely looked at them. Then she turned and walked toward the waiting Uber. As the car pulled away from the curb, Helen stared out the window. She didn't cry. But her hand gripped the phone in her lap, thumb resting on the banking app. The loan information was still open. And in that quiet ride home, something inside her began to shift. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. But with clarity. The late afternoon sunlight hit Helen's kitchen window at a sharp angle as she rinsed her hands in the sink, her sleeves rolled up, the scent of lemon and sugar still lingering in the air from the brownies she had baked. Her apron, a faded green one with tiny embroidered flowers, hung loosely around her waist. She had taken care with everything that morning, too much care, perhaps, in hindsight. The kind that only comes from someone who still holds hope in a place that has already started to harden. After the Uber dropped her off and drove away, she didn't go inside immediately. Instead, she stood on the front steps of her home, keys in one hand, the other resting on the wooden railing worn smooth by years of Pittsburgh weather. Her thoughts weren't racing, they were quiet, deliberate. There was no chaos in her mind, just a strange stillness that made everything around her feel distant. Inside, the house was silent. No sounds of television or radio. No voice calling her name. She walked through the narrow hallway toward the kitchen, placed her keys gently on the counter, and opened the refrigerator not because she was hungry, but because she needed to do something that felt normal. She closed it again without taking anything out. Later that evening, as she folded laundry in the living room, her phone buzzed. Not a call. A notification from the bank. The payment had posted. The first installment for Michael's new car. She stared at it for a while. Not with anger. With precision. She clicked to review the details again, then set the phone down. The sun had dipped below the horizon by then, leaving the room tinged in a soft blue. She didn't turn on the light. The next morning came without the weight of dread, only the dull ache of disappointment. Helen dressed in jeans and a sweater, tied her hair back, and walked to the neighborhood cafe 3 blocks down, something she hadn't done in a while. She ordered black coffee, sat near the window, and watched the people outside pass with dogs, strollers, grocery bags. Life, uninterrupted. At the table beside her, 2 women around her age chatted about their grandkids and a church fundraiser. Helen listened absently, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. When the waitress came to refill her coffee, Helen asked, almost without thinking, "Do you know much about canceling a loan as a guarantor?" The waitress blinked. "No, ma'am. I don't think I do." Helen nodded, smiled softly. Didn't think so. That afternoon, she didn't bake. She didn't clean. Instead, she pulled out the manila folder from the drawer beside her desk, the one with the loan paperwork, payment schedules, her retirement account summaries, and a letter from the bank representative who had helped her secure the approval. She read through everything slowly, like she had done a dozen times before, but this time with a different set of eyes. Her phone rang once, caller ID, Michael. She let it go to voicemail. Then, she opened her laptop and logged into her online banking. There was a pause, long and quiet, before she moved the cursor to the contact form and submitted a request to speak to a representative about guarantor cancellation terms. It wasn't a guarantee it would be approved, she knew that. But it was a signal. A step. And that alone was a shift too large to ignore. The following day, Helen went to her church's weekly donation drive, something she had committed to for years. She stood beside Mrs. Donnelly folding donated jackets into neat stacks, but her thoughts weren't there. She found herself folding the same coat twice, not realizing it until Mrs. Donnelly gently tapped her arm. "You all right, Helen?" Helen smiled, the same way she had the day before. Soft. Almost convincing. Just a little distracted. That evening, while making herself a modest dinner, the phone rang again. This time it was her sister, Marlene, who lived 2 states away. "I heard Michael got a new car," Marlene said after the initial greetings. Helen leaned against the counter. "He did. Bet he's thrilled. You always wanted him to have something reliable." Helen stirred her pasta absent-mindedly. "He's got more than that now. He's got what he thinks is enough." Marlene was quiet on the other end, then said, "You don't sound happy about it." "It's not the car, Marlene." "It never is," Marlene replied, the words landing with more weight than either of them expected. That night, Helen didn't sleep well. Her dreams weren't filled with arguments or drama, they were filled with empty seats at dining tables and long drives with no destination. She woke before dawn, made herself tea instead of coffee, and stared out the window as the first hints of light touched the edge of her street. By noon, she had an email from the bank. A representative named Jamie would be calling her shortly to discuss her request. The conversation was short and efficient. Jamie explained the process, the implications, the risk it posed to Michael's financing. Helen listened, asked a few pointed questions, and took notes. When the call ended, she sat there for a long time, the receiver still in her hand. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, she clicked the button. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. There were no tears, no music swelling in the background. Just a confirmation screen. A status change. A subtle realignment of the ground beneath her feet. Helen closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the back porch. The sun was setting again, painting the sky with muted oranges and purples. She sat in the wooden rocking chair Michael had helped her carry from the garage years ago. It creaked beneath her as it always did. From the porch, she could see the tree he had climbed as a boy. The corner of the yard where they used to set up sprinklers in the summer. The worn path where he had ridden his bike in circles until twilight. She remembered how small he had been. How fierce his loyalty had seemed back then. Inside the house, the silence felt heavier now. But Helen didn't mind it. Silence had its own kind of truth. And in that truth, she found something like resolve. Michael didn't call again that night. And Helen didn't wait for him to. The Monday after Helen had formally requested her name be withdrawn as the guarantor of Michael's car loan, she returned to her daily routines as though nothing had shifted. There was laundry to fold, a few groceries to pick up, and a patch of roses in the front yard that had begun to wilt. These were the anchors of her day, small acts of maintenance that kept the grief from becoming too loud. But even as she clipped stems and swept the walkway, the sound of Michael's voice from the day before still echoed inside her. He hadn't said much, just those few words. The phrasing was strange. "I ordered you an Uber." He hadn't asked her if she needed a ride. He had already assumed she did. There had been no room for her, not in the car, not in the moment, not in his tone. The decision she'd made after that, quiet, deliberate, sat within her like a stone in water. It didn't bring relief. It didn't spark regret. It simply remained. 3 days passed without contact. Then, on Thursday afternoon, while Helen was sitting on her porch peeling apples for a pie she had no intention of baking, her phone rang. It was Michael. She stared at the screen before answering. The call was brief. His voice was tight. "The bank called," he said. "They said the loan's been cancelled. That the co-signer, my guarantor, withdrew support. That was you, right?" Helen pressed the paring knife into the apple skin, steady. "Yes." There was a pause on the other end. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice rising, not yet angry, but disoriented. "We should talk about it," she replied. "In person." "I'm at work, Mom." What happened? Did something go wrong?" Helen didn't answer immediately. She heard him exhale. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Then come by when you have time," she said gently. "We'll talk." He hung up without saying goodbye. Helen placed the knife down and gathered the apple peels into a bowl. Her hands were shaking slightly now, not from fear, but from the weight of what had begun. She understood this moment well. This was the part after the boundary was drawn, the silence before the storm. The next day passed quietly. On Saturday morning, Helen received an unexpected knock on the door. She opened it to find Lindsay standing on the porch, arms crossed, sunglasses still on even though it was overcast. Helen stepped aside without a word, letting her in. Inside, the silence felt denser than usual. Lindsay remained standing, just past the doorway, like a guest who refused to settle. "I assume you know why I'm here," she began. Helen met her eyes. "You're here about the loan." Lindsay removed her sunglasses slowly. Her expression wasn't grief, it was contempt disguised as concern. "You jeopardized our financing, Helen," she said. "Michael's credit is tied to this. So is mine. We planned around this. You can't just back out like that." Helen didn't react. She walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and returned. "I didn't back out," she said, voice even. "I stepped away from something I should never have been part of in the first place." Lindsay's jaw tightened. "That's not how the world works. You don't get to undo a contract just because you felt excluded one afternoon." Helen raised her eyebrows slightly. "Is that what Michael told you? That I felt excluded? Didn't you?" Lindsay shot back. "Because of the Uber?" Helen didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and looked out at the backyard, where the wind was tossing leaves from the maple tree. "I've spent most of my life making sure Michael never felt left out of anything. Never felt second. So yes, being dismissed like that, it meant something." Lindsay crossed her arms again. "You're punishing us." Helen turned back to face her. "I'm setting a limit." "A limit?" Lindsay repeated, as though the concept were offensive. "I gave him something," Helen said calmly. "And then he gave me an Uber. That math doesn't work for me anymore." Lindsay scoffed. "That's petty." Helen stepped closer, but not aggressively. "I didn't ask for space in the front seat. I didn't even expect the back. But what I won't be is invisible. Not in a car I helped him buy." Lindsay's face hardened. She turned toward the door. "I hope you know what you've started," she said. "This won't end the way you think it will." Helen didn't follow her. She watched as Lindsay walked out and slammed the door behind her. The house echoed with the sound for several seconds. Helen stood still, feeling the silence settle once again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The next morning, she attended church. She sat in her usual pew and exchanged polite greetings with familiar faces, but her thoughts were distant. During the sermon, the pastor spoke about the weight of dignity, how quiet strength was often mistaken for bitterness, how boundaries sometimes came dressed as betrayal. Helen sat still, her hands folded in her lap. That afternoon, she didn't hear from Michael. She didn't expect to. But in the early hours of the evening, just after dinner, she received a message from her bank confirming that the vehicle loan had officially been retracted and returned to lender review. It was now Michael's responsibility to renegotiate, or return the car. Helen didn't celebrate. She simply logged off, turned off her phone, and went to the porch. The evening air was warm, the kind that hinted fall was slowly giving way to a colder season. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, Helen understood something without needing it to be said aloud. This wasn't the end of her relationship with Michael. But it was the end of something else. Something that had once been unconditional. And maybe that was the beginning of something better. Helen woke early on Sunday morning, before the sun had broken the horizon. The house was still, the silence not unfamiliar but now tinged with something less comfortable. She sat on the edge of her bed, her feet flat on the hardwood floor, staring at the soft rug beneath them. The familiar texture, the creak of the wooden frame as she shifted, the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs, these were the small, anchoring sounds of a life that had been built on quiet repetition. But today, there was something unfamiliar in her posture. Not regret. Not mourning. A kind of readiness. She made tea instead of coffee. The kettle took longer to boil than she remembered, or perhaps time just moved differently when there was something waiting to be done. By 8 o'clock, she had changed into a plain gray sweater and jeans, tied her hair back, and opened her laptop. Her inbox had one unread message from the bank, confirmation that the loan adjustment had been processed and that the next steps were entirely in Michael's name. The bank required no further action from her. She read it twice. Then she closed the laptop, stood up, and went to the small desk in the living room where she kept her old filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder labeled Michael, filled with documents dating back to his school days, report cards, immunization records, college admission letters. Among them were 2 recent papers, the loan agreement, and the printed copy of her withdrawal confirmation. She placed both in the folder, closed the drawer, and sat on the couch, staring out the window. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance, and a few leaves from the maple in her yard fluttered down to the sidewalk. Summer was beginning its slow retreat. Everything about the world outside seemed unchanged. But inside Helen, something had settled, deeply and quietly, like a door that had been closed without noise. That afternoon, she walked to the grocery store. She passed the bakery where she used to stop with Michael after school, and glanced briefly at the empty bus stop where they had waited during snowstorms when the car had broken down. These places, once filled with memory, now felt like old film reels, still there, but silent. As she walked past a group of teenagers laughing on their bikes, she caught a snippet of a mother calling out to her child from a porch across the street. The voice had warmth, urgency, love folded into a single sentence. Helen's chest tightened, not with sorrow, but with something more complicated. She had been that voice for so long. And now she wasn't sure where it had gone. When she returned home, there was a missed call from Michael. She didn't return it. Instead, she made herself a sandwich, turned on the radio to a classical station, and let the day pass without further intrusion. That evening, Helen sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea steaming beside her, and picked up the notepad she kept for writing recipes. But she didn't write a recipe. She wrote a list. It was a list of every time she had stepped in for Michael. Rent when he was between jobs. Tuition when his scholarship came up short. Groceries during college. The emergency dental bill when he cracked a tooth playing basketball. A dozen small interventions. She didn't write them with bitterness, just clarity. Next to each item, she added one word, given. Not owed. Not loaned. Just, given. Then she wrote a new word beneath the list, enough. She tore the page out and placed it in the back of the Michael folder. Not for him to read. For herself. The next morning, she received another call, this time from an unfamiliar number. She didn't answer, but moments later, a voicemail appeared. Michael's voice, clipped and frustrated. "Mom, can you just call me back? I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this is serious. We can't get the new financing without a cosigner. Lindsay's parents already said no. I don't get it. Call me. She listened to the message once. Then again. Then deleted it. She didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in his confusion. Only confirmation that she had done what she needed to do, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to step out of the shadow she had quietly occupied for too long. That evening, Helen decided to go through her attic. It had been years since she'd opened the old boxes labeled Michael, childhood, and college stuff. She found baby clothes, old toys, graduation programs, and a faded photo of the two of them from a summer trip to Lake Erie. In it, Michael was 12, grinning with a popsicle in hand, and she was sitting beside him on a dock, sunburnt and laughing. It was one of the few photos of her where she looked genuinely at ease. She placed the photo on her dresser. As she climbed back down from the attic, dusty and tired, her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one shorter. I need to talk to you. In person. She put the phone face down and began making dinner. Later that night, just as she was finishing the dishes, the doorbell rang. Through the window, she saw Michael's car parked outside. He stood on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, shifting from foot to foot. He looked older than he had even a few weeks ago. Not in years, but in wear. Helen opened the door slowly. Can we talk? He asked. She stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she had offered to co-sign the loan only months earlier. Michael didn't touch the glass of water she offered. He kept his eyes low. Why didn't you just say something? He asked. Why do it like this? Helen folded her hands in her lap. Because you wouldn't have listened. That's not true. She raised her eyebrows. Isn't it? He didn't respond. She leaned forward slightly. You didn't see me that day, Michael. Not really. You saw a task to manage. A detail to bypass. I was just trying to make everything work, he mumbled. Everyone was already in the car. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Helen nodded. It was a small moment. But it revealed a lot. Michael looked up, his face tight with shame. You're my mom. I thought you'd understand. I do, she said softly. That's the problem. They sat in silence for a long while. I can't get the loan without you, he finally said. I know, she replied. So what do I do? That's your decision, Helen said. For once, it should be. Michael stood slowly. I guess that's it, then. Helen walked him to the door. At the threshold, he paused. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, she said. But you did. He nodded, opened the door, and walked into the night. Helen didn't cry. She didn't sit on the couch and wait for his car to disappear. She went upstairs, brushed her teeth, and turned off the lights. She had made her decision. Quietly. Completely. And she was no longer waiting for anyone to understand it. 3 days had passed since Helen had last seen Michael on her doorstep. The house had returned to its usual silence, but it no longer felt like sanctuary. It now carried a weight of something unresolved, like a breath held too long. Helen moved through her routines with precision, her steps deliberate, as though doing the familiar might quiet the unfamiliar ache beneath her ribs. The phone remained silent until Wednesday afternoon. She was folding towels in the upstairs hallway when it rang. For a moment, she just stood there, listening to the sound echo through the house. Then she stepped into the bedroom, picked up the phone, and saw his name on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom, Michael said. His voice was low, rushed, almost apologetic in tone, but missing the substance behind it. Hi, Michael. I just got off the phone with the bank. Helen said nothing. They said the loan was fully cancelled. That there's no co-signer now, and unless I can secure one in the next 48 hours, the car will be repossessed. She folded a towel slowly. Yes, that sounds about right. His voice tensed. Can you tell me why you didn't warn me? I don't understand why you do something like this without talking to me. You're talking to me now, she said. He sighed, frustrated. I mean before. You could have given me a heads up. Something. You asked me why I did it, she said calmly. I told you. Now you're calling to ask why I didn't do it differently. I guess I just expected more from you. Helen paused at that. The towel in her hands now perfectly folded, she set it aside. You expected me to stay quiet and supportive, like always. That's what you mean. No, he said too quickly, too sharply. I expected something else. Helen sat on the edge of her bed. Michael, when you were a boy, you used to come into this room when you were scared. You never knocked. You just came in and curled up next to me, and I never asked for an explanation. I just made space. That's what I did for years. Made space. Quietly. Freely. This time, you didn't even notice the space was gone. His voice cracked slightly. You think I don't appreciate you? I think you've forgotten how to. A long silence followed. He cleared his throat. Can we talk? Face to face. You're welcome to come by, she said, not unkindly. But I'm not signing anything. That part's finished. Michael didn't respond. He hung up. Later that evening, Helen prepared dinner for one. Chicken and rice, simple, comforting. She ate slowly, chewing each bite like it was part of a meditation. The house creaked with its usual nighttime sounds, but they felt heavier now, every tick of the clock, every gust against the windows like another reminder that something in her world had tilted, and there was no righting it quickly. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Helen opened it expecting to find Michael. Instead, she found Lindsay. She looked tired. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wasn't here for pleasantries. Helen opened the door fully, letting her in without speaking. Lindsay entered, clutching her purse tightly. She remained standing in the entryway. I'm not here to argue, she began. But Michael's not handling this well. Helen raised an eyebrow slightly. I'm not sure how else he expected this to go. Lindsay looked down for a moment, then back up. He's not sleeping. He's panicking. And to be honest, I'm furious with him too. But we're married. Which means when he makes a mess, I'm part of it. Helen gestured toward the living room. Lindsay sat, reluctantly. I came to ask, off the record, if you're absolutely sure about this. If there's any room left for reconsideration. Helen sat across from her. No. There's not. Lindsay nodded slowly, like she had already known but needed to hear it said aloud. I told him this would happen, she said after a pause. When we started talking about buying a new car, I said it was too much. But he wanted it. He said it would make things easier. That it would impress the clients. That it was time to level up. Helen gave a small, wry smile. I'm familiar with the tone. Lindsay looked over at her. He idolizes you, you know. Still. He might not act like it, but it's there. Helen's face didn't move. Idolizing someone and respecting them aren't the same thing. Lindsay looked down again. I know this isn't my place to say, but you matter to him. Even if he's clumsy with it. He's always felt like he had to prove himself to you. Helen blinked, slowly. He didn't. I only ever needed him to see me. They sat in silence for a while, the space between them heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Lindsay stood. Thank you for letting me in. Helen walked her to the door. I hope he figures it out, Helen said as Lindsay stepped outside. I do too, she replied. That night, Helen pulled out a pad of stationery and began to write a letter. It wasn't for sending. It was an exercise. Something to clarify what had become too complicated to carry silently. She wrote slowly, each word chosen carefully. Michael. This isn't about a car. It's about a pattern. A long one. You learned how to walk because I let you fall first. I let you stumble into balance. But somewhere along the way, I stopped letting you fall. I caught you too many times. And in doing that, I think I confused love with rescue. You mistook my constant presence for a guarantee. I love you. I always will. But I cannot stand in for your choices anymore. I won't be your backup plan. That doesn't mean I'm abandoning you. It means I'm trusting you to stand. I hope you do. Mom. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Unsent. Unread. But necessary. The phone didn't ring the next day. Nor the one after. Helen felt the silence stretch, but she didn't chase it. She knew that growth often required space. Even if it hurt. And so, she waited, not for an apology, but for a shift. A new rhythm. One where love wasn't confused with sacrifice. And if that rhythm never came, she would still be here. Whole. Unapologetic. And finally, after all these years, firm in her own quiet decisions. It was a gray Thursday morning when the knock came again, sharp, impatient. Helen had just finished watering her indoor plants, a ritual she'd kept every Thursday for years, long before Michael had left for college, long before the silence between them had stretched into something new and uncertain. The house was still, her cardigan sleeves damp from the mist of the spray bottle. When she opened the door, she was not surprised to see Lindsay standing there again. But something was different this time. Lindsay didn't ask to come in. She pushed past the threshold without waiting for an invitation, her arms wrapped around herself, as though she were holding in more than just words. Helen closed the door quietly, watching the younger woman pace the living room like someone preparing for a battle they hadn't expected to fight. I tried, Lindsay said. I tried to stay quiet. To let him handle it. To let this blow over. But it's not blowing over, and I can't keep pretending I'm not furious. Helen waited. She wasn't interested in defending herself. She'd spent a lifetime doing that, apologizing, explaining, softening truths so they'd be easier to swallow. This time, she listened. He's not just hurting, Lindsay continued. He's shutting down. He won't talk to me. He won't talk to his friends. He's walking around like the world betrayed him, and I'm stuck watching him unravel because of something that, frankly, he caused. Helen folded her hands in her lap. And you came to tell me that? No, Lindsay snapped. I came to tell you something you need to hear. She took a breath, like she was trying to slow herself down. You've spent your whole life saving him. Everyone knows that. Michael talks about you like you're a saint, like you could fix anything if you just cared enough. But he doesn't talk about what that's done to him, or to you. Helen's brow lifted, surprised by the sharpness in Lindsay's tone. But she remained quiet. I used to admire it, Lindsay said, pacing again. The way you were always there. The way you put him first. But now I see it differently. You didn't just give him everything, he let you. And now he doesn't know what to do when the safety net is gone. Helen stood, slowly. So now it's my fault he can't stand on his own? No, Lindsay said, her voice lowering. I think it's both of yours. The words hung there between them, like the dust floating in the morning light that filtered through the curtains. Helen walked to the window, her voice even. You think I should have let him fail earlier? I think, Lindsay said carefully, that if someone never has to fight for themselves, they forget how. Or they never learn. Helen turned. Do you love him? Lindsay blinked at the sudden question. Of course I do. Then why are you here? Why not fight this with him? Why come here looking for blame? Lindsay looked down at her hands. Because I'm tired. And I don't know how to be his wife and his parent at the same time. Helen exhaled, deeply. She understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. For a moment, she saw herself in Lindsay, not the woman who had been abandoned decades ago, but the one who picked up the pieces alone and never stopped carrying them. He needs to decide, Helen said. Not just about the car. About who he is. And who he wants to be. Lindsay nodded. And if he doesn't? Helen's expression didn't change. Then you'll have to decide who you want to be. They stood in silence, two women tethered by the same man, both exhausted by the weight of roles they hadn't entirely chosen. Lindsay reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. He wrote this. Said he couldn't bring himself to give it to you in person. Helen took the envelope but didn't open it. Thank you. Lindsay stepped toward the door. I don't know what happens next. Helen offered a sad smile. None of us do. As the door closed behind her, Helen returned to the kitchen and set the envelope on the table. She stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was unmistakably Michael's, slightly slanted, rushed at the end. She ran a finger along the edge but didn't open it. Instead, she made tea. The next day passed uneventfully. The envelope remained on the table, untouched. Helen didn't avoid it. She just refused to let it dictate the pace of her emotions. On Saturday morning, she finally opened it. The letter was short. Mom. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I thought getting that car would mean I was doing something right, that I was growing up, building a life, proving something. But it's all falling apart, and I don't know if that's because I made the wrong choices or because I relied on you to make them safe. I'm angry. But I know I don't have a right to be. Not really. You've always been there. Always given more than I deserved. Lindsay says I don't see you clearly. Maybe she's right. Maybe I've only seen the version of you that made things easier for me. I don't know what you want from me now. But I'm listening. Michael. Helen folded the letter slowly, the paper warm from her hands. There were no apologies in it. But there was something else, uncertainty. And in that space, she saw a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. That night, as she sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, she thought about her own mother. How she'd passed away before Michael was born. How different her parenting had been, stern, distant, pragmatic. Helen had vowed to do it differently. And she had. But now she wondered if, in trying to shield her son from every storm, she'd also blocked the sunlight that might have helped him grow. The next morning, she wrote her own letter. Michael. You don't need to know what you're doing yet. But you need to take responsibility for the decisions you've made. That's what adulthood is. Not the car, not the job, not the image. It's easy to call for help when you fall. Harder to learn how to rise on your own. I've always wanted to protect you. But now I want more than that, I want to respect you. Let me. Mom. She didn't send it. Not yet. But this time, she didn't put it in a drawer either. She left it on the table beside his letter. Side by side. A quiet conversation, waiting for the next chapter. It was Monday afternoon when Helen heard the familiar sound of a car door closing in front of her house. She stood at the window, peeking through the curtains just enough to confirm what her instincts had already told her: Michael was back. He didn't walk with the casual confidence she remembered. His steps were slower, his shoulders more slumped, and he hesitated at the front steps as if unsure whether to knock or turn back. She waited until she heard the knock, 2 soft raps, before opening the door. He didn't bring anything with him. No envelope, no gift, no apology prepared. Just himself. That was new. Hi, he said. Hi. I was hoping we could talk. Helen nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He walked into the living room like someone returning to a childhood home that had changed just enough to feel unfamiliar. She gestured toward the couch, and they sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of all the unsaid things pressing down on the space between them. I read your letter, he said, his voice low. and I've been thinking about it a lot. She nodded once. Good. It's just, I didn't realize how much I leaned on you. I mean, I knew you always helped, but I thought I was doing my part too. You were, she said. Until you weren't. He looked down, hands clasped together. I guess I thought asking you to co-sign wasn't a big deal. I didn't see it as another favor. I saw it as something we were doing together. Helen tilted her head slightly. You say that, but you made the decision alone. You picked the car. You planned the payments. You chose to include your in-laws in that first ride but not me. His face flushed. I didn't mean it like that. But that's what happened. He exhaled, frustrated with himself. I didn't even think about it. That's the worst part. I know, she replied. That's exactly why it hurt. He looked up at her, eyes pained. I've never felt this lost before. Lindsay's angry. The dealership won't give me an extension. The bank said I might have to return the car. I don't know how to fix this. Helen leaned back against the couch, her gaze steady. Maybe fixing it isn't the point. Maybe understanding it is. Michael rubbed his hands over his face. You always made things feel stable. Even when we had nothing, you made it feel like we were okay. I guess I just thought, you'd always be that person. I am, she said. But not in the way you want anymore. He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not here to clean up your messes, Michael. I'm here to remind you that you're capable of cleaning them up yourself. His voice cracked. What if I'm not? Then you'll learn, she said gently. The same way I did. There was a long pause. Michael looked around the living room, his eyes lingering on the framed photos lining the mantel. Most of them were of him, graduations, birthdays, childhood moments frozen in time. He stood slowly and walked over to one in particular, a photo of the two of them standing in front of their old car, the one that had broken down every other month but somehow always got them where they needed to go. I hated that car, he said, almost smiling. Helen chuckled softly. So did I. But we never missed a school play or a doctor's appointment. No, she agreed. We didn't. He turned back to her. I think I was trying to outrun all of that. The old car, the old house, the memories of being the kid whose mom had to work double shifts. I wanted to look like I'd made it. And now? She asked. I don't know, he admitted. Now I just want to feel like I know who I am. Helen stood and walked toward him, not with pity, not even with forgiveness, but with presence. You are someone worth loving, she said. But you're also someone who needs to learn how to carry his own weight. He nodded slowly. So where do I start? Start by owning the choices you've made. Return the car if you have to. Talk to Lindsay. Stop looking for someone to pull you out and start figuring out how to swim. He looked at her, not as a son looking for rescue, but as a man finally asking for guidance. Can I still come to you? He asked. Always, she said. But don't expect me to carry you. He looked down again, but this time there was no shame in it, only thoughtfulness. I'm sorry, he said. For how I made you feel that day. For not seeing you. Helen placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Thank you for saying it. They sat back down, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between them felt healing rather than heavy. There was still so much to work through, so much that couldn't be fixed in one conversation. But something had shifted. Michael stayed for dinner. They didn't talk about the car again. Instead, they spoke of small things, news from the neighborhood, Helen's latest attempt at baking gluten-free bread, a funny story from Michael's office before the car debacle had consumed his life. After dinner, as he helped her wash the dishes, he glanced at her and said, I think I'll return the car. It's not worth all this. She didn't respond with approval or disappointment. She just handed him the next plate. Later, when he left, she stood at the door watching him walk back to the vehicle. He paused before getting in, turning to offer a small wave. She raised her hand in return, then closed the door softly behind her. There was no grand resolution that night. No celebration. But the next time Helen walked past the table where the letters had sat, she noticed something. Her note was gone. And in its place, a sticky note with 6 handwritten words in the same familiar slant. "I'm trying. Please don't give up." She smiled, tucked the note into the same folder where she kept everything else that mattered, and finally, for the first time in a long while, felt like something lost was beginning to come back, not all at once, not easily, but honestly. And that was enough. The days that followed Michael's visit passed with an uncertain stillness. There had been no shouting, no final confrontation, no dramatic fallout. Just a shift, subtle but undeniable, like the quiet creak of a house settling in the cold. Helen found herself slipping back into the rhythms of solitude, not because she had chosen them again, but because they had returned naturally, like tides she could no longer control. The note Michael left remained in her folder, tucked between pages documenting years of sacrifices and milestones. She had read it only once more, committing the simple message to memory. He was trying. That was all he had said. But it had been enough to halt the silent spiral of disappointment that had started consuming her. Still, trying did not mean calling. It did not mean visiting. It did not mean updates or apologies. It meant something Helen could not yet see, only feel in the absence that followed. The first full week of silence came and went. She busied herself with small projects, reorganizing her spice rack, repainting the porch railings, donating old clothes to the shelter across town. She even joined the Thursday book club at the library again, where women in their 60s and 70s debated literature over weak coffee and shortbread cookies. None of them knew what had unfolded in Helen's life recently. They just welcomed her back with soft smiles and dog-eared paperbacks. In the evenings, she sat with her tea, the living room quiet, the ticking clock the only companion. She didn't cry. She didn't even dwell. But there were moments, glimpses, when she would glance at the hallway where Michael used to toss his backpack after school, or at the empty second chair at the kitchen table, and feel something not quite like sorrow, but close. On the 10th day of silence, Helen's neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, knocked at her door with a basket of apples from her yard and a bit of idle gossip about the people 2 houses down. "Did you hear?" she asked. "Young man with the black SUV, he returned it. Saw him unloading a bunch of boxes from the trunk last week." Helen paused, fingers brushing the handle of the basket. "Returned it?" Mrs. Donnelly nodded. "Repossessed, maybe. Or he gave it back himself. I don't pry. Just figured you might know something, since he's your boy." Helen kept her expression composed. "Thank you for the apples, Betty." That night, she found herself staring at her computer screen longer than usual, the browser cursor blinking in an empty search bar. She typed "vehicle voluntary repossession consequences" and read silently. Most of it, she already knew. But seeing the words confirmed it. Michael had likely surrendered the car. Whether it was by choice or necessity, she couldn't tell. And she wasn't sure which answer would feel worse. On the 13th day, a letter arrived in her mailbox. It wasn't handwritten, but it bore Michael's name and the return address. Inside was a single page. "Mom. I turned in the car. They gave me 2 days to clear it out. Lindsay cried the whole drive over. I didn't. I think that scared her more than anything, that I was numb to it. But I wasn't. I just couldn't afford to fall apart. They asked me if I wanted to leave a complaint. I said no. I didn't tell them it wasn't the bank's fault. That it wasn't even really yours. I've been walking to work. It's not far, just over 2 miles. Gives me time to think. I know now that the car wasn't the problem. It was just the thing I used to hide behind. I thought success meant never struggling, never needing help again. But maybe it means knowing when you do, and choosing wisely who you ask. I don't know what's next. But I want you to know I'm not angry anymore. Thank you for making me face this. Michael." Helen read the letter twice before folding it and placing it in the same folder with the others. She didn't reply. Not yet. That weekend, at church, she sat in her usual pew and felt, for the first time in weeks, the heavy burden of absence in a way she couldn't ignore. She missed him, not the version that had taken her for granted, but the one that used to ask her to stay 5 more minutes at bedtime, the one who had once fallen asleep on her shoulder during a thunderstorm when he was 16 and too proud to admit he was scared. After the service, she walked home slowly, the cool wind slipping beneath her coat, reminding her that fall was nearing its close. She paused once to look at a yard sale 2 blocks from her house. Among the scattered tables, she spotted a child's toy car, red, plastic, scratched at the edges. A man nearby offered it for $5. Helen smiled politely, shook her head, and kept walking. That night, she received a text message. It was simple. I don't know if it's okay to call. She stared at the screen for a full minute before typing. You can. The call came 30 minutes later. Hey, Michael said. His voice sounded different over the phone, softer, smaller, not weighed down with the performance of pretending. Hi, she replied. I didn't want to assume you were ready to talk. I've been ready. Just waiting for you to be. He let out a breath. Things have been hard. I didn't realize how much of my sense of self came from other people's approval. Or from pretending I didn't need anything. It's easier to pretend than to face what we've ignored. Yeah, he said. Lindsay's struggling with all of this. I think she's scared. I think I am too. It's okay to be scared, Michael. It's not okay to stay there. There was a long pause. I don't know how to rebuild all of it. Me. Us. You start with truth. And with time. He didn't speak again for several seconds. Then, quietly, I'd like to come by. Not today. But soon. I'll be here. They said goodbye without lingering. And as Helen hung up the phone, the silence that followed was different than the weeks before. It was no longer filled with hurt or hesitation. It was spacious. It was patient. It was the kind of silence that makes room for what comes next. The morning after the phone call, Helen awoke earlier than usual. The house, still wrapped in the quiet of dawn, felt softer, as if it too had exhaled with her. The leaves outside had begun to fall in earnest, covering the sidewalk in patches of orange, yellow, and brown. It was the kind of morning that asked for reflection, for slow sips of coffee and letters never meant to be mailed. She had been thinking of writing again, not a reply to Michael's recent letter, but something else. Something that had been gathering inside her for weeks but had never found its way to paper. There were things she still needed to say, not to him, but for herself. She brought her coffee into the living room, pulled a blanket over her lap, and opened her notebook. Dear Michael. I've written you so many times in my head. Words I didn't speak because I was afraid they'd either be too much or not enough. I've imagined what it would feel like to hand you a letter and watch your face change as you read it, but not once did I picture sending this. I suppose that's how I know I'm writing it for me, not for you. I don't need you to understand everything I've done. I'm not sure I understand it all myself. What I do know is that there came a moment, in the back of that Uber, when something in me shifted. Not because I was humiliated, but because I saw myself, finally, with clear eyes. I saw the decades of sacrifice, of silence, of shrinking myself to make room for everyone else. I saw a woman who had poured herself into someone else's life for so long, she forgot she still had one of her own. I think I let that Uber ride become a symbol. Not just of being excluded, but of being invisible. I wasn't angry that day. Not really. I was erased. And I knew, in that moment, that if I didn't make a choice, if I didn't finally say, this far and no further, then I never would. Not with you, not with anyone. That's why I canceled the loan. Not to hurt you. Not to get revenge. But to remind myself that I exist beyond what I do for others. And I needed you to see that too. There's still so much I love about you. That hasn't changed. But I won't carry the cost of your comfort anymore. That's no longer love. That's submission. And I'm done with that. Take care of yourself, Michael. Mom. She closed the notebook slowly, pressing her palm against the cover as if sealing something sacred inside. The letter, unsent, was never meant for the mailbox. It was meant to be written, not delivered. She placed it inside the same folder where the others lived, her private archive of heartbreak and healing. Later that afternoon, Helen decided to walk to the post office. She didn't need to send anything. She just needed the movement, the routine. As she crossed the parking lot, she heard a voice behind her, firm, older, and unmistakably familiar. Helen McCarthy? She turned to see a man approaching, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy blue windbreaker, his silver hair neatly combed. She recognized him instantly, Brian Caldwell, Lindsay's father. Her stomach tensed. "Brian," she said carefully. "Didn't expect to see you here. Mind if we talk?" She glanced around. "If it's about Michael, I'm not sure this is the time or place." "It won't take long," he said, his tone brisk. They stepped to the side, near the brick wall of the building, away from the people coming and going. Helen folded her arms, not defensively, but firmly. Brian wasted no time. "I heard what happened with the car. And I also heard you're the reason the financing fell through." "I am," she said. "You put your own son's future at risk," he said flatly. "I put my own self-respect back in place." He narrowed his eyes. "You co-signed for him. You had a responsibility." "I had a responsibility to protect him when he was a child. Now, I have a responsibility to myself." Brian scoffed. "This isn't about you. This is about his marriage. His career. He needed that car." "No," she replied. "He wanted that car. There's a difference." He stepped closer, his voice growing more pointed. "You sabotaged him. All because you were offended." Helen didn't flinch. "I didn't do this because I was offended. I did this because I was erased. There's a difference there, too." Brian looked at her, as though assessing whether she truly believed her own words. "Do you have any idea how difficult you've made things for Lindsay?" he asked. "I imagine not as difficult as I made things for myself, standing in a driveway, being dismissed like a stranger." There was a long pause. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves at their feet. "You're not the only parent who made sacrifices," Brian said finally. "No," Helen agreed. "But I'm one of the few who finally asked for something back." He shook his head. "This won't end the way you think it will." Helen took a step back. "I'm not looking for an ending, Brian. I'm looking for a beginning, one that doesn't require me to disappear for everyone else to shine." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the post office entrance, leaving him standing there. When she returned home, the weight of the conversation settled in her chest, not heavy, but tight, like a door that had closed a little too hard. That evening, she received a text message from Lindsay. "He told me about your talk with my dad. Thank you for standing your ground." Helen stared at the message. There was no apology in it. No plea. Just acknowledgement. She typed back 2 words. "You're welcome." The next morning, Helen began cleaning out the guest room. It hadn't been used in months, but something told her it might be needed soon. She washed the sheets, opened the window to let in the autumn air, and placed a small basket of essentials on the dresser: soap, a fresh towel, a notebook, and pen. Later that day, she made a pot of chili and left the back porch light on, not as a symbol of hope or invitation, but as a simple act of readiness. Something was changing. The silence between them was no longer hollow, it was ripening into something else. And Helen, after so many years of giving without asking, was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be present without vanishing. The letter she had written would never be mailed. But it had done its work. It had reminded her who she was, before the Uber, before the loan, before the long years of silence. and that memory was a kind of homecoming. The sky was overcast the next morning, a pale slate gray that promised rain but never quite delivered it. Helen stood in her kitchen peeling carrots for a stew she had no appetite for, her hands working on instinct as her mind wandered back to the encounter outside the post office. Brian Caldwell's words echoed faintly, not because they were unexpected, but because of the certainty with which he'd spoken them, like a man used to being listened to, obeyed. She had looked him in the eye. She hadn't flinched. But even now, hours later, her chest still held a residual tightness. Not from fear. From the weight of having finally stood her ground, without yielding or defending. It had cost something. What exactly, she couldn't yet define. The knock at her door that afternoon was not a surprise, though she hadn't expected anyone so soon. When she opened it, Michael stood there alone, shoulders hunched under his windbreaker, his eyes dull from lack of sleep. "Hi," he said. "Come in." He stepped inside and immediately removed his shoes, something he hadn't done in years. Helen noticed. He hovered near the doorway, waiting for her to direct him, but she simply gestured to the armchair in the living room. She remained standing, her arms lightly crossed. "I talked to Lindsay," he said. "She told me about your conversation with her dad." Helen didn't respond. Michael looked uncomfortable, like he had come prepared for one type of exchange but wasn't sure anymore which script to follow. "He wasn't trying to cause trouble," he added, almost defensively. Helen gave a quiet scoff. "He came to accuse me. That's not the same as concern." Michael nodded, as though he had expected that response. "He thought you overreacted." "I'm sure he did." There was silence, stretched and taut. "I didn't ask him to do it," Michael said finally. "He went on his own." "I didn't assume you did," Helen replied. Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Still. I should have stopped him. Or warned you." "That would have been nice," she said, not with bitterness but with restraint. He nodded again. "I think part of me didn't want to get in the middle." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Michael, you are the middle." That made him laugh, quietly, despite himself. "Yeah. I guess I am." She finally sat, not to soften the moment but to meet him where he was. He looked tired, not just physically, but existentially. The way people look when their sense of direction collapses. "You know," she said, "your father-in-law said something to me that stuck." Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What was it?" "He said I was sabotaging your future." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "He doesn't get it." "I don't think he wants to," Helen said. "But what struck me wasn't that he said it. It's that, for a long time, I might have believed it myself. That any act of refusal on my part was selfish. That stepping back was a betrayal." Michael looked at her, really looked this time, with a kind of attention that hadn't been there in years. "And now?" "Now I think the real betrayal would have been continuing to let you live in a version of the world where your comfort came before my worth." He looked down, ashamed. "I didn't see it like that," he said. "I know," she replied. "But now you do." Michael shifted in his seat, uncomfortable again. "Lindsay's having a hard time with everything. I think she's questioning things." Helen's gaze didn't soften. "Because the fantasy cracked." "Maybe," he admitted. "She liked the idea of our life looking stable." "We both did. But it wasn't." "No. It was borrowed." "I should have said no to the car," he said. "To the loan. I should have thought it through." "Regret isn't always helpful," Helen said. "Responsibility is." Michael leaned back, exhausted. "He called you disposable." Helen blinked slowly. "What?" "My father-in-law. He said you were acting like you were owed something. That family's about sacrifice. And if you weren't willing to do that anymore, maybe you didn't belong in this part of my life." Helen stared at him, the words settling cold. "I didn't say anything," Michael added quickly. Not then. I didn't know how. But I should have. And I will. She nodded slowly, folding her hands in her lap. You should. There was another long silence. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap gently against the windows. I'm not proud of how I handled any of it, he said. But I think this might have been necessary. For both of us, Helen agreed. I'm starting to see how much of you I've taken for granted. And not just recently. For years. She didn't reply immediately. Then, I raised you to be strong. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to let you struggle. I kept stepping in. And you kept letting me. And now? He asked. Now I won't, she said. He looked relieved, strangely. I need to make some changes, he said. I might lose more than the car. Then lose it, Helen said. Anything worth keeping will stay. The rest will teach you who you are. He stood after that, slow and uncertain. I think I'd like to come around more often. Not to ask for things. Just to be here. I'd like that, she said. But only if you come as my son, not as my burden. He looked her in the eye. I can do that. She walked him to the door. The rain had thickened, a soft gray curtain across the street. Michael pulled up his hood and stepped out, then turned back. Thank you for not yelling at me. Helen gave a half smile. I stopped yelling when I realized silence says more. He smiled faintly and nodded before heading into the rain. She watched him until he turned the corner. Later that night, Helen sat by the window with a book open on her lap. The rain continued steadily, a calming percussion against the roof. She didn't know what the next days would bring, what Michael's decisions would cost, or how his marriage might bend under the pressure. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had reclaimed something vital. Not her son. Herself. It was late on a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Helen heard another knock at the door. She hadn't been expecting anyone, but something about the rhythm of it, slower, more deliberate than usual, told her who it was before she even crossed the room. Michael stood on the porch, soaked from the light rain, without an umbrella or jacket. His clothes clung to him, and his shoes were caked with damp mud. There was no bravado in his posture, no practiced speech waiting behind his lips. Just weariness, and something deeper than sorrow. She opened the door but didn't say anything. He didn't either. I didn't know where else to go, he said finally. She stepped aside, and he walked in with the heaviness of someone who had run out of excuses. I don't have the car anymore, he said once they were seated. Officially. It's gone. They took it back yesterday. Helen watched him without speaking. I cleaned it out myself, he went on. Drove it to the dealership, signed the paperwork, handed them the keys. They asked if I wanted a shuttle home. She raised an eyebrow. And? I said no. He looked down at his hands, damp from the rain, resting on his knees. I walked, he said. Just kept walking. Past our old high school. Past that diner we used to go to after appointments. I ended up sitting on a bench for an hour before realizing I had no place else to be. Helen leaned forward slightly. And Lindsay? He closed his eyes briefly. She told me she's going to stay with her parents for a while. Said she needed time to think. Did you ask her to? No, he said. But I didn't stop her either. Helen nodded, her face unreadable. She doesn't understand why I let it all fall apart, he continued. The car. The loan. The image we were trying to maintain. I tried explaining it wasn't about you. That it was me. My choices. My need to prove something I couldn't define. But she kept coming back to one thing. She said I had changed. And had you? Helen asked. Michael hesitated. I think I had started to. But not in the way she meant. Not like some transformation. More like. I stopped pretending I was someone I wasn't. Helen stood then, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a clean towel. She handed it to him wordlessly, and he dried his face and neck. "I've made a mess of everything," he said, his voice flat. "I let myself believe that the way out of fear was through appearance. Through success. Through a better car, a polished version of life. And in the process, I abandoned the very people who made that life possible." Helen sat across from him, elbows resting on her knees. "You abandoned yourself, too?" He didn't reply, but his shoulders slumped further under the weight of that truth. "I told her no," he said suddenly. Helen blinked. "To what?" "To her parents. To Brian. After the whole confrontation with you, he called me. Told me I needed to fix this. That I needed to go back to the bank, get another co-signer, or beg you to reconsider. Said Lindsay deserved more stability." "What did you say?" "I told him I wasn't asking for anyone to fix this but me." Helen studied his face. There was a resolve there she hadn't seen in years. "I said no," he repeated. "I've never said that to him before." "And how did he take it?" "Badly," Michael said. "But it felt right. Like I had finally taken off a suit that never fit me to begin with." Helen reached for her tea, her fingers steady. "So what now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't have a plan. I've got a few resumes out. I'm picking up some freelance work where I can. I sold a few electronics. And I'm staying in a motel on the edge of town. But it's expensive, and it's temporary. I just needed to come here today." "To ask for money?" Helen asked, her voice even. "No," he said quickly. "To tell you I'm sorry. For all of it." She held his gaze, letting the silence test the sincerity of his words. It held. "I never wanted to make you feel small," he said. "I wasn't small," she replied. "I was just unseen." Michael's face crumpled slightly, the first hint of tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "I think I wanted to see you as an idea. Someone always strong. Always giving. I didn't know what to do when you became human." Helen gave a small smile. "No child ever really does." He looked up at her. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I see it now. Everything you gave up. Everything you carried." She nodded, her throat tight but her expression calm. "And if you'll let me," he added, "I'd like to stay here for a while. Not as a guest. As someone who needs to rebuild. From the floor up." Helen stood and walked toward the hallway. "The basement's warm. Clean. There's a small bed and a desk. You'll have to help with groceries, and I won't be doing your laundry." He stood too. "Deal." As he moved toward the basement door, he paused. "Do you think she'll come back?" Helen walked to the window and looked out at the gray afternoon sky. "If she does," she said, "it'll be because you finally came back to yourself first." He nodded, then disappeared down the stairs, his footsteps soft, like someone entering a space he knew was not owed to him, but granted. That night, Helen sat at the kitchen table, sipping her tea slowly. The house was not quieter. It was not louder. It was just different. It had changed. And so had she. Not because she had drawn a line, or enforced a boundary. But because she had discovered that love, when no longer confused with sacrifice, could still hold space. Not by carrying, but by watching someone learn to stand. The basement hadn't been used regularly since Michael left for college. It had once been a space for storage, then a half-hearted attempt at a home office, then nothing more than a quiet place for forgotten things. But now it had a new rhythm, one of early footsteps, late-night creaks, and the scent of someone rediscovering humility. Michael didn't say much during the first week of his return. He came upstairs early each morning, made himself coffee in silence, washed the mug, and disappeared again for most of the day. Helen didn't ask where he went. She didn't hover. Her only requests were that he keep the place clean, contribute to groceries, and return by a reasonable hour. Not because she worried like before, but because she believed that part of rebuilding was routine. She noticed small changes. He no longer left dishes in the sink. He folded the laundry he used to leave in the dryer. Once, he vacuumed the entire upstairs without being asked. And every now and then, he stopped to ask if she needed anything, from the store, from the hardware shop, even from the pharmacy. Helen's responses were brief but not cold. "I'm fine, thank you," or "already taken care of." But her tone was softer than before, her gaze steadier. She wasn't guarding herself. She was simply being clear. One afternoon, she found a brown paper bag by the door. Inside were 2 jars of local honey and a note in Michael's handwriting. "Saw these at the market. You used to say they helped with your allergies." She didn't respond in writing. But that night, she used a spoonful in her tea and left the jar out where he could see it the next morning. Their conversations remained brief. Occasionally they spoke over dinner. Helen still cooked, out of habit more than obligation. When Michael offered to make a meal, it was simple and clumsy, but she ate it without critique. One evening, as they shared a pot of vegetable stew, she asked, "How's the job search?" He wiped his mouth and set the spoon down. "Slow. But I'm applying every day. A few temp agencies, some contract work." "Something will come," she said, then added, "Just be honest with what you can and can't do." "I'm learning that," he said. One night, after a long day, he entered the kitchen to find Helen quietly polishing an old photo frame. He glanced over her shoulder and saw the picture of him at 5 years old, beaming at the camera with a crooked front tooth. Helen crouched beside him holding a birthday cake. "I remember that day," he said. "You made the cake yourself." "Every year until you turned 15, she said, still looking at the picture. "You stopped because I said it was lame." "No," she said with a quiet smile. "You stopped asking." He didn't answer right away. "I'm sorry for that too," he said finally. She looked up at him. "Michael, you don't have to apologize for every misstep of your youth. But now that you're not a child, you're responsible for how you treat the people who loved you through those years." He nodded, letting the truth settle without defense. As autumn began to shift into the edge of winter, their days found a quiet cadence. Michael landed a part-time job stocking inventory at a local hardware store. It paid modestly, but he came home tired in a way that felt honest. "Feels good to move," he said one night as he massaged his shoulders. "To feel like I earned my fatigue." Helen poured him a cup of tea. The kind of exhaustion that comes with purpose is different. He looked at her, grateful. "I never knew how much of this normal life stuff, was built on small sacrifices." "You weren't supposed to," she said. "But now you do." Later that week, Michael came home with a box of old books and folders. "Lindsay dropped these off," he said. "She's staying with her parents for now." We had a long talk. Helen didn't ask for details. But Michael offered them anyway. "She said she needs time. That I need time. She's not sure who I am anymore." "Are you?" Helen asked. "I think I'm getting closer," he said. "I told her I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to build a life based on what things look like. I want one built on truth, even if it's not impressive." "And what did she say?" "She cried," he said. "But not in anger. She said she didn't know if we'd make it, but she was proud of me for saying that out loud." That night, Helen found him sitting on the back porch. It was cold, and he was bundled in one of his old jackets, the steam from his tea swirling in the air. She joined him without speaking, pulling her own coat tighter around her. They sat in silence until Michael spoke. "You know, I used to think success was about having more than you gave. More money, more things, more applause. But now I think it might just be waking up in the morning knowing you didn't lie to anyone, especially yourself." Helen nodded. "And showing up. Even when you're not sure what to say." He looked over. "Like now?" "Exactly like now." He let out a small breath, half a laugh. You think I'll get there? He asked. I think you already started. That night, he slipped a note under her door. It wasn't long, just a few lines in his now familiar slanted handwriting. Thank you for giving me the space to rebuild without asking me to rush. I know I can't fix everything. But I can start with myself. I won't waste this chance. Helen didn't reply. She didn't need to. The next morning, she baked muffins for the first time in months. When Michael came up for breakfast, she had already set a few on a plate for him, still warm. Blueberry, she said. Your favorite. He smiled, sat down, and didn't say another word. Because this was what rebuilding looked like. Not with grand gestures or instant resolutions. But with truth. With time. And with a quiet seat at the table. The first snow arrived quietly that year. Helen woke to a thin dusting over her lawn and the sidewalk, just enough to brighten the view, not enough to demand a shovel. The air was crisp, the morning silent in that particular way winter had of softening everything. She stood at the kitchen sink, looking out the window with her hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching as the neighborhood children tried to catch flakes on their tongues. Downstairs, Michael was already awake. She could hear the faint movement, floorboards creaking under careful steps, the low sound of him making his bed, the occasional cough. In recent weeks, his routine had become steady. He woke early, went to work, returned quietly, and often spent the evening reading or applying to better positions. He spoke more now, but sparingly, each word deliberate, never to fill silence, only to contribute something real. Helen had come to appreciate that quiet. Not the stillness of avoidance, but the calm of presence. The house no longer felt hollow, it felt shared. That afternoon, Michael asked if he could borrow the car. Just for an hour, he said. I have something to check out. I'll fill the tank. She handed him the keys without question. He returned almost 2 hours later, parked in the same place, and came inside with snowflakes still clinging to his sleeves. I found something, he said, unzipping his coat. It's not much, but it's reliable. A guy I met through work is selling his old sedan. Said I could come back tomorrow for a proper test drive. Helen looked up from her book. What year? 2009, he said with a small smile. It's got some wear. A few scratches. But it runs well, and it's in my budget. No loan? She asked. No loan, he confirmed. Cash. Saved from the last couple months. Plus I sold my watch, the one Lindsay gave me. And a few electronics I wasn't using. Helen closed her book and gave a single nod. That's a good start. The next day, he bought the car. It was nothing like the SUV. It didn't shine. It didn't have touchscreens or seat warmers. But it started on the first turn of the key, and it got him from one place to another. He parked it behind her house, where the old garden shed had once stood before it collapsed during a storm 3 winters ago. That Saturday, he came upstairs just after lunch. I want to take you somewhere, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Where? Nowhere far. Just for a drive. She looked at him for a moment, gauging whether there was more behind the request. Then she stood, reached for her coat, and followed him out the door. The car was warm when she stepped inside. It smelled faintly of pine from a new air freshener hanging on the rearview mirror. The passenger seat was clean, the floor free of wrappers or debris. He had taken care, every detail intentional. As he pulled out of the driveway, he said, "The last time I asked you to ride in a car, I didn't mean it like this." She glanced at him. "You didn't ask. You ordered me an Uber." He winced. "Right. I meant, this is different." And it was. They drove without a specific destination. Through quiet back roads, past the lake that froze each winter and shimmered like glass in spring. Through neighborhoods where children built snowmen and teenagers shoveled driveways under the reluctant supervision of their parents. He didn't play music. He didn't fill the space with chatter. About 10 minutes in, he pulled over beside a park. They sat facing an open field, now covered in a thin layer of snow. "I don't need a car to prove anything anymore," he said. "But I wanted this one. Not to fix things, not to replace anything. Just to start again. On my terms." Helen looked out at the field, at the empty picnic benches and the leafless trees. "That sounds like something worth driving for." He smiled, then added, "There's always space for you in this one." She turned toward him, her voice soft. "It was never about the car, Michael." "I know," he said. "It was about the seat I gave you in my life. And the one you didn't." He nodded. They sat for a long time, watching the clouds shift. Eventually, he started the car again and turned back toward home. As they drove, he reached into the glove box and pulled out a small envelope. "I wrote something," he said, handing it to her. "Don't open it now. Just, later." She accepted it, tucked it into her coat pocket without looking at it. That evening, after dinner, she opened the envelope in the quiet of her room. Inside was a short note, handwritten and careful. "Mom. This isn't a thank you letter. This is a letter of recognition. I see you now. Not just as the woman who raised me. Not as the nurse who worked long shifts or the mother who always had dinner on the table. I see you as a whole person, with needs, limits, dignity, pride. And I'm sorry it took me so long. I don't know what kind of man I'll become. But if I turn out with even a fraction of your strength, I think I'll be okay. Michael." Helen sat with the letter for a while, the edges soft beneath her fingertips. She didn't cry. The ache was still there, some wounds never fully disappear, but there was peace now, too. The kind that settles in slowly, like snow on rooftops. Weeks passed. Michael continued working. Eventually, he found a full-time position at a local logistics company. He kept the car clean, changed the oil himself, and asked for nothing. Lindsay didn't return, not yet. They still spoke, but now without pressure. With honesty. Helen never asked for updates. She let her son carry that part of his life. And every so often, Michael would take her for a drive. No special occasion. No long conversation. Just space. And this time, always with a seat waiting for her. The story didn't end with a grand reconciliation or a dramatic twist. It ended with something better. A steady hand on the wheel. A quiet understanding in the passenger seat. And finally, a road ahead that belonged to both of them, not because one had built it for the other, but because they had chosen to walk, and now ride, beside one another, one honest mile at a time. As the snow thickened outside and the days shortened, Helen knew one thing with certainty. She hadn't just regained her place in her son's life. She had reclaimed her space in her own.